The stagecoach rattled violently as it made its final approach to Lovelock, Nevada territory, kicking up clouds of dust that swirled in the late afternoon sun of May 1875. Inside, Josephine Harper clutched her small carpetbag with trembling hands, wincing as each bump jostled her tender ribs and awakened fresh pain in the bruises hidden beneath her high-collared traveling dress. The letter from her soon-to-be husband was folded neatly in her pocket, a promise of safety that felt increasingly desperate as the miles had stretched behind her. "Lovelock coming up, miss," the driver called down. "Your new life awaits." Josephine touched her swollen cheek self-consciously. The other passengers had pointedly avoided looking at her face throughout the journey, their eyes sliding away whenever she glanced up. She'd told herself it was better this way. The less questions, the better. No one needed to know what had happened in Boston, or why she had fled 3,000 miles to marry a stranger. When the stagecoach finally lurched to a stop in front of the Lovelock General Store, Josephine remained seated while the other passengers disembarked. She needed a moment to collect herself, to remember why she had come. Samuel Quincy, a cattle rancher, 30 years old, unmarried, looking for a wife to share in the building of a good life, as his advertisement had stated. His letters had been kind, straightforward, devoid of flowery language but promising respect and stability. "Miss Harper," the driver peered in, his weathered face softening slightly when he saw her hesitation. "Can I help you down?" "Thank you," she murmured, accepting his calloused hand as she stepped carefully from the coach, her legs stiff from the long journey. The small mining and ranching town spread before her, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, nothing like the crowded brick streets of Boston she had left behind. A tall figure detached from the shadows of the general store's porch. Josephine's heart thundered in her chest as she tried to remember how to breathe. This would be him, the man she had promised to marry, a stranger who would either be her salvation, or she shuddered at the thought another mistake. Samuel Quincy stepped into the light, and Josephine's first impression was of solidity. He stood at least 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered in a clean cotton shirt, vest, and denim pants. His face was tanned from the sun, with clear blue eyes that widened visibly when they took in her appearance. Her hand flew instinctively to her cheek, where the bruise had darkened to a deep purple over her journey west. For a terrible moment, nobody spoke. Josephine felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing, cataloging the cut on her lip, the bruise on her cheekbone, the careful way she held herself to protect her ribs. She saw something flash in his eyes, anger perhaps, or disgust, and her heart sank. Would he send her back? Had she traveled all this way only to be rejected? But then Samuel Quincy stepped forward, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. Up close, she could see the light stubble on his strong jawline, the furrow between his brows that spoke of concern rather than revulsion. When he spoke, his voice was low and gentle, like one might use to calm a spooked horse. "Miss Harper," he said, then hesitated, his eyes never leaving her face. Finally, he moved closer, close enough that only she could hear his next words, whispered with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No one will ever hurt you again." The simple declaration cracked something inside Josephine's carefully maintained composure. She had been strong for so long through the beatings from her employer, through the desperate escape, through the endless journey west. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to show weakness in front of the curious onlookers who had gathered to witness the arrival of the mail-order bride. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Quincy," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. "Samuel," he corrected gently. "Or Sam, if you prefer." He offered his arm with a formality that surprised her, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed her gloved hand lightly upon it. His arm was solid beneath her fingers, and she could feel the strength in him, a strength that made her both wary and hopeful. "My wagon's just over there," he said, gesturing to a sturdy buckboard where two chestnut horses stood patiently in their harnesses. "I've got a room arranged for you at Mrs. Bedford's boarding house. I thought you might want to rest before we discuss our arrangement further." Relief washed through her. He wasn't expecting to marry her immediately. He was giving her time. "That's very considerate," she said softly. As they walked toward the wagon, she felt the stares of the townspeople following them. Whispers floated on the dusty air. She kept her eyes downcast, feeling the shame of her appearance burning through her. "Don't mind them," Samuel said quietly. "Small-town folk don't get much excitement. They'll find something else to talk about by tomorrow." "And what about you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "What will you be thinking about tomorrow when you look at this?" She gestured vaguely toward her face. Samuel stopped walking, turning to face her fully. His expression was solemn but not unkind as he studied her face. "I'll be thinking about what kind of man could do this to a woman, and I'll be thinking that you're brave to have come all this way alone." Something in his words, in the sincerity of his gaze, allowed Josephine to breathe a little easier. He helped her into the wagon with careful hands, mindful of her obvious injuries, then climbed up beside her. As he took up the reins, she stole a sidelong glance at him. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way that Charles, her former employer, had been. Samuel's features were too rugged, his nose slightly crooked as if it had been broken once, but there was a steadiness to him that Charles had never possessed. The wagon pulled away from the stage-coach stop, leaving behind the curious stares of the townspeople. As they rattled down the main street, Samuel pointed out the key buildings of Lovelock, the general store, the small church, the sheriff's office, the saloon that he advised her to avoid. His voice was a pleasant rumble beside her, asking nothing, demanding nothing, simply filling the silence. When they reached Mrs. Bedford's boarding house, a neat two-story white clapboard structure with green shutters, Samuel jumped down and came around to help her. His hands were warm and strong as they spanned her waist, lifting her down as if she weighed nothing. For a moment, they stood close, and Josephine found herself studying the small scar above his right eyebrow, the flecks of gray in his otherwise dark brown hair that suggested he might be closer to 35 than 30. "Mrs. Bedford will take good care of you," he said, stepping back. "She's a widow, runs a respectable place. I've arranged for you to have the room at the back of the house. It's quieter there, has its own small porch." "How long?" Josephine began, then stopped, unsure of what she was even asking. "How long until we marry? How long until you change your mind?" Samuel seemed to understand her unspoken question. "I've told folks we'll be having a small wedding in 2 weeks' time, but that's only if you're still willing after you've had a chance to recover and get to know me a bit better. If you decide this isn't what you want, I'll see to it that you have the means to go wherever you choose." The kindness of this offer, this freedom, was so unexpected that Josephine couldn't immediately respond. In Boston, choices had been stripped from her one by one until escape had seemed the only option left. "Thank you," she finally whispered, knowing the words were inadequate. Samuel nodded once, then retrieved her carpetbag from the wagon. "I'll come by tomorrow mid-morning if that suits you. Perhaps we could talk then." "I'd like that," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Mrs. Bedford turned out to be a round, motherly woman with sharp eyes that took in Josephine's bruises with a single glance. To her credit, she asked no questions, simply showed Josephine to a clean, modest room at the back of the house, as Samuel had promised. The room had a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser with a mirror, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and as Samuel had mentioned, a private door that opened onto a small, covered porch overlooking a garden that was just beginning to bloom. "Mr. Quincy's arranged for your meals to be served here in your room if you prefer," Mrs. Bedford said, her voice matter of fact. "At least until you're feeling more sociable." "That's very kind, but no need to explain, dear. We all have our stories." The older woman patted Josephine's hand. "Supper's at 6. I'll bring you up a hot bath before then. You look like you could use it after that long journey." Left alone, Josephine sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion crashing over her. She had made it. She was in Nevada, thousands of miles from Charles Blackwood and the horrors of that last night in his house. Her fingers traced the tender flesh of her cheek, remembering how his signet ring had cut into her skin when he discovered her plans to leave, but she had escaped. And now she was here in this quiet room, with a man she didn't know waiting to marry her. A man who had looked at her bruised face and promised that no one would hurt her again. Could she trust such a promise? She had trusted before and been betrayed. Josephine unpacked her meager belongings, 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a hairbrush, a small leather-bound journal, and the letters from Samuel Quincy that had given her hope during her darkest hours in Boston. She placed them in the dresser drawers, then sat at the small desk by the window and pulled out the most recent letter, reading it again even though she had memorized it weeks ago. "I cannot promise wealth or luxury," he had written in his straightforward hand, "but I can promise honesty, respect, and a home where you will be valued. Nevada territory is still wild in many ways, but there is beauty here and freedom. I hope you will find it suits you. Freedom." The word lingered in her mind as she gazed out the window at the mountains rising in the distance beyond the small town. Perhaps here, in this remote place, she could finally find what had eluded her in Boston, a life of her own choosing. When Mrs. Bedford brought up the promised bath, Josephine eased her aching body into the steaming water, washing away the dust of travel and allowing herself, for the first time in weeks, to think about the future rather than the past. Samuel Quincy was still a stranger, but he had shown more kindness in their brief meeting than Charles had shown in the entire year she had worked in his household. Perhaps, just perhaps, she had made the right choice in coming here. The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains of Josephine's room. She had slept better than expected, lulled by the unfamiliar silence of the small town after years of Boston's constant noise. After dressing in her second-best dress, a modest blue cotton with buttons all the way up to her throat, she examined her reflection in the small mirror. The bruise on her cheek had begun to yellow slightly at the edges, but it remained an ugly mark that no amount of careful hairstyling could hide. Mrs. Bedford brought breakfast to her room as promised: hot biscuits, scrambled eggs, and strong coffee. "Mr. Quincy said he'd be by at 10, she informed Josephine. "He's a good man, you know. One of the few around these parts I'd trust with a young woman in your situation." Josephine looked up sharply. "My situation?" Mrs. Bedford's expression softened. "I may not know the details, dear, but I recognize a woman running from something, or someone." She poured coffee into Josephine's cup. "You wouldn't be the first bride to arrive in the West carrying more than just luggage. I'm not." Josephine began, then stopped. What was the point in denying what was so clearly written on her face? "Will everyone in town assume the worst about me? People will talk." That's the nature of small towns, but most folks around here have their own secrets. They tend to mind their business if you mind yours. The older woman adjusted her apron. And Samuel Quincy has been respected in these parts since he established his ranch 8 years ago. His good opinion counts for something. After Mrs. Bedford left, Josephine ate slowly, savoring the hot food after days of stagecoach station meals. As she sipped her coffee, she wondered what she would say to Samuel when he arrived. How did one begin to build a life with a stranger? The mail-order bride advertisements had made it seem so practical, so straightforward. A business arrangement that might, with time, develop into something like affection. But now that she was here, the reality of what she had agreed to loomed large. At precisely 10 o'clock, Mrs. Bedford knocked on her door. "Mr. Quincy's here to see you, dear. I've shown him to the back garden. Thought you might appreciate the privacy." Josephine smoothed her skirts nervously and checked her reflection one last time. There was nothing to be done about the bruises, but at least her hair was neatly arranged in a simple chignon. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out onto her private porch and descended the 3 wooden steps to the garden below. Samuel stood waiting, hat in hand, looking surprisingly different from the previous day. He had shaved and his dark hair was neatly combed. He wore a clean white shirt under a dark vest and polished boots that suggested this was not just a casual visit. When he saw her, something in his expression shifted, a softening around the eyes that made Josephine's heart beat a little faster. "Good morning, Miss Harper," he said, his deep voice carrying easily in the quiet garden. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you." She gestured to a small bench beneath an apple tree that was just beginning to blossom. "Shall we sit?" They settled on the bench, a proper distance between them. Yet Josephine was acutely aware of his presence, the clean scent of soap, the breadth of his shoulders, the careful way he positioned himself to face her without crowding her. "I thought you might like to know more about where you'd be living," Samuel began, "if you decide to go through with our arrangement." "Your ranch," Josephine prompted when he paused. He nodded. "The Lazy Q. It's about 12 miles outside town, nestled against the foothills. Not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's growing. I've got about 500 head of cattle, good grazing land, and a creek that runs year-round. The house is solid, 4 rooms downstairs, 2 upstairs, a proper kitchen, and a covered porch that wraps around 2 sides." As he spoke, Josephine could hear the pride in his voice. This was a man who had built something from nothing, who valued what he had created. It was reassuring. "It sounds lovely," she said truthfully. "Do you manage it alone?" "I've got 2 hands that live in the bunkhouse, brothers, Jim and Tom Wilson. Good men, been with me for 5 years. And Maria Delgado comes up from town 3 times a week to help with cooking and laundry." He paused. "I want to be clear, Miss Harper. If you become my wife, I'm not looking for a servant. I'm looking for a partner. Partner." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Josephine twisted her hands in her lap. "Mr. Quincy, Samuel, please, Samuel." His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate somehow. "I feel I should be honest with you about these." She gestured to her bruised face. His jaw tightened, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I was employed in Boston as a governess to a prominent family. The father, my employer, he—" She swallowed hard, the words sticking in her throat. "He began to make advances. When I refused him, he became violent. The night before I left, he discovered I had purchased a ticket west. He was furious." Samuel's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained gentle. "You don't need to tell me more if it's painful. No, I want you to know. I need you to understand why I came here." She took a deep breath. "I had no family to turn to, nowhere safe to go. Your advertisement in the Boston newspaper, it seemed like providence, a chance at a new beginning." "Is there any risk he might follow you?" Samuel asked, his expression grave. Josephine shook her head. "He is a powerful man in Boston society. His reputation matters too much for him to chase after a governess. And besides, he believes I will return when my money runs out. His pride wouldn't allow him to imagine I would choose to marry a stranger rather than accept his attentions. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice had a controlled quality that suggested he was working hard to contain his anger. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I want to be equally honest with you." He turned to face her fully. "I advertised for a wife because this life, it gets lonely. I want children, a family, but I also understand that what I'm asking is no small thing. To marry a man you've never met, to leave everything familiar behind. I won't pretend it will always be easy. Ranching is hard work, and Nevada winters can be brutal. But if you decide to stay, to become my wife, I promise you 3 things." He held up one finger. "First, I will never, ever raise a hand to you in anger. What was done to you," his voice roughened, "it sickens me. No man worthy of the name treats a woman that way." A second finger joined the first. "Second, while I hope that in time we might find affection together, I will never force myself upon you. A marriage should be built on mutual respect." The third finger rose. "And lastly, if you find that this life, or that I myself am not what you hoped for, I will ensure you have the means to make your own way. You will never be trapped here." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes and she blinked them back. "Those are generous terms. Not generous, just decent." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else I should tell you. I was married before." Josephine couldn't hide her surprise. This had not been mentioned in his letters or his advertisement. "Her name was Sarah," Samuel continued, his voice softer now. "We came west together 7 years ago. She died in childbirth 5 years back, our son with her." "I'm so sorry," Josephine whispered, understanding now the flecks of gray in his hair, the lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of grief. "It was a hard time," he acknowledged. "I don't speak of it often, but I wanted you to know. I've known love, Miss Harper. I've known what it means to build a life with someone. I don't expect to replace what I lost, but I do believe it's possible to find happiness again, in a different way." His honesty touched something deep inside Josephine. Here was a man who had suffered his own losses, who understood pain, yet had found the courage to reach out for connection again. "I would like to see your ranch," she said finally, "if that would be possible before we make any final decisions." Relief washed over Samuel's features. "I'd like that. How about the day after tomorrow? Give you another day to rest, and I need to bring some cattle to the stockyards tomorrow." "That would be fine." Josephine hesitated, then asked, "Would it be improper for me to walk around town today? I've been sitting in a stagecoach for so long, I find I crave movement. And perhaps it would be good to see more of the place that might become my home." "Not improper at all. Though," he glanced at her bruised face, "you might face some curious looks." "I've endured worse than looks," she said with a wry smile that surprised even herself. Samuel's expression softened. "I imagine you have." He stood, offering her his hand to help her up from the bench. "If you'd like, I could show you around town myself before I head back to the ranch." His hand was warm and calloused against her gloved one. "I'd like that," Josephine said, and found she meant it. They walked together through Lovelock's modest streets, Samuel pointing out buildings of interest and introducing her to people they encountered. As he had warned, there were curious glances, but Samuel's presence beside her seemed to discourage most outright staring or comments. He was clearly respected in town, exchanging easy greetings with storekeepers and ranchers alike. At the general store, he insisted on purchasing a new bonnet for her, a practical straw one with a blue ribbon that matched her dress. "The Nevada sun is stronger than what you're used to in Boston," he explained. You'll need protection." The simple gift touched Josephine. It wasn't frivolous or meant to adorn her. It was practical, thoughtful, chosen with her comfort in mind. How different from Charles's gifts, that had always come with expectations attached. As they walked back toward Mrs. Bedford's boarding house, Josephine found herself studying Samuel's profile. His features were strong, his gaze direct but not intimidating. There was a steadiness to him that inspired confidence. She tried to imagine herself as his wife, living on his ranch, sharing his life. The image was not as frightening as she might have expected. "I'll come for you day after tomorrow, around 9 in the morning," Samuel said as they reached the boarding house. "The ride to the ranch takes about 2 hours. We can have lunch there and I'll show you around. I'll have you back in town before dark." "That sounds perfect," Josephine said, suddenly shy under his steady gaze. "Until then, Miss Harper." He touched the brim of his hat respectfully, then turned to go. "Josephine," she called after him impulsively. "If I'm to call you Samuel, then you should call me Josephine." He turned back, a smile warming his features for the first time. It transformed his face, softening the weathered lines and lighting his blue eyes. "Josephine," he repeated, as if testing the name. "It suits you." As she watched him walk away, Josephine felt something unfamiliar flutter in her chest. Not fear, not anxiety, but something lighter. Something that might, with time and care, grow into hope. The next day passed quietly for Josephine. Her bruises were fading slightly, though the tenderness in her ribs remained. Mrs. Bedford proved to be a wealth of information about Lovelock and its inhabitants, sharing town gossip as she brought Josephine her meals. "Samuel Quincy's one of the good ones," she said over lunch, echoing her earlier assessment. "When his wife died, he withdrew for a time, threw himself into building that ranch. Some thought he'd never recover, but the past year or so, he's been coming back to himself. Started attending socials again, participating in town affairs." "You knew his wife?" Josephine asked, curious about the woman Samuel had loved and lost. "Sarah, oh yes, lovely girl, from St. Louis originally, I believe. Educated, refined, but not afraid of hard work." Mrs. Bedford poured more tea into Josephine's cup. They were devoted to each other. When she died, this whole town mourned with him. Josephine absorbed this information thoughtfully. "And he never considered remarrying until now." Mrs. Bedford's shrewd eyes met hers. There were widows who would have happily stepped in, and a few fathers with unmarried daughters who made overtures. But Samuel wasn't interested. Said if he ever married again, it would be to someone who chose him freely, not someone pushed into his path by circumstance. The comment resonated with Josephine, who had spent most of her life being pushed by circumstances beyond her control. First by her parents' deaths when she was 16, leaving her without means or protection. Then by the limited options available to an educated but penniless young woman. Even her flight west had been prompted by desperation rather than free choice. Yet Samuel had offered her something different: the opportunity to decide, to choose for herself whether this life, this marriage, was what she wanted. It was a gift more precious than she could express. That evening, Josephine wrote in her journal, recording her impressions of Lovelock, of Samuel, of the path that had brought her to this moment of decision. As she wrote, she realized with surprise that she was looking forward to visiting his ranch tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing the place he had built, to understanding more about the man who had promised her safety and respect. When she finally closed her journal and prepared for bed, Josephine found herself standing before the small mirror, examining her face in the lamplight. The bruises were fading to yellow-green, still visible but no longer the angry purple of her arrival. Soon, they would disappear completely, leaving no external mark of what she had endured. But the internal marks remained: the fear that still made her flinch at sudden movements, the wariness that had become second nature. Would those fade too with time? Could she learn to trust again, to open herself to the possibility of happiness with this man who promised never to hurt her? Josephine didn't know. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was willing to find out. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with a freshness to the air that hinted at the vastness of the Nevada sky. Josephine dressed with care in her best dress, a modest dove-gray cotton that had traveled surprisingly well. She arranged her auburn hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, donned the new bonnet Samuel had bought her, and was ready when he arrived promptly at 9. He waited for her on the front porch of the boarding house, standing beside a well-maintained buggy drawn by a handsome bay horse. Like the day before, he had made an effort with his appearance, wearing a clean white shirt and dark vest beneath his practical duster coat. "Good morning, Josephine," he said, his voice warming as he said her name. "You look well today." She felt a flush of pleasure at the simple compliment. "Thank you. I feel better rested than I have in weeks." He helped her into the buggy with careful hands, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they drove through town and out onto the open road, Josephine felt a growing sense of anticipation. The landscape spreading before them was unlike anything she had seen before: vast open spaces punctuated by distant mountains, the land painted in shades of gold, rust, and sage green. "It's beautiful," she murmured, taking in the expansive sky above them. "So different from the east." "It grows on you," Samuel said, glancing at her. "When I first arrived, I thought it looked barren, empty. But now I see it differently. There's a kind of honesty to this land. It doesn't hide what it is behind pretty facades." They traveled for nearly 2 hours, the road winding through rolling hills that gradually gave way to more rugged terrain. Samuel pointed out landmarks as they went: a distant mountain range, a creek that flowed year-round, rock formations with colorful names given by early settlers. He was knowledgeable about the land, speaking of it with the easy familiarity of someone who had made it his own. Finally, they crested a small rise, and Samuel pulled the buggy to a halt. "There it is," he said quietly. "The lazy Q." Below them, nestled against the foothills, lay a small valley. A creek wound through it, bordered by cottonwood trees that stood out vividly green against the golden landscape. Near the center of the valley sat a substantial house built of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides just as Samuel had described. Beyond it stood a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. In the distance, cattle grazed on hillsides dotted with sagebrush. "It's lovely," Josephine said truthfully. The ranch had a settled, established feel to it, not a temporary claim staked in wilderness, but a real home carved from the land with patience and care. Samuel's expression was one of quiet pride as he gazed down at his creation. "It's taken 8 years to build it to what you see now. When Sarah and I first arrived, there was nothing but a one-room cabin and a dream." As they drove down into the valley, Josephine could see more details: a vegetable garden beside the house, a small orchard of young fruit trees, a chicken coop. It was self-sufficient, practical, but there were touches of beauty: 2 wildflowers planted along the porch, curtains visible in the windows of the house. 2 men looked up from their work in one of the corrals as the buggy approached, raising hands in greeting. "The Wilson brothers," Samuel explained. "Jim's the taller one, Tom's the broader. Good men, both of them. They live in the bunkhouse just beyond the barn." He pulled the buggy to a stop in front of the house, and before he could come around to help her, the front door opened and a woman emerged, middle-aged, plump, with black hair streaked with silver and a warm brown complexion. "Miss Harper, this is Maria Delgado," Samuel said as he handed Josephine down from the buggy. "She keeps us all fed and the house in order." "Welcome to Lazy Q, Miss Harper," Maria said with a slight accent, her dark eyes taking in Josephine's fading bruises with a flicker of sympathy but no comment. "I have lunch almost ready. I hope you like beef stew." "That sounds wonderful, thank you," Josephine replied, warmed by the woman's straightforward welcome. The inside of the house surprised Josephine with its comfort. The main room was spacious, with polished wood floors partially covered by woven rugs, sturdy furniture that looked handcrafted but comfortable, and a large stone fireplace at one end. Windows let in ample light, and bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that suggested Samuel was more well-read than his rugged exterior might indicate. "Sarah loved to read," he explained, following her gaze to the books, "and I've developed the habit myself over the years. Winter evenings are long out here." He showed her through the rest of the downstairs, a formal dining room they rarely used except for holidays, his office where he kept the ranch accounts, and the large kitchen where Maria ruled supreme. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms, the master bedroom with its large 4-poster bed, a smaller bedroom that Samuel explained had been intended for their child, and a guest room that was simply furnished but comfortable. Throughout the tour, Josephine tried to imagine herself in these rooms, living this life. It wasn't difficult. Despite its isolated location, the house felt welcoming, lived in, a true home rather than just a shelter. They ate lunch on the covered porch, the spring breeze carrying the scent of sage and sun-warmed earth. Maria's stew was delicious, accompanied by fresh baked bread and cool water from the well. As they ate, Samuel spoke of his plans for the ranch, expanding the herd, possibly adding sheep next year, improving the irrigation system for the small orchard. "I've been thinking about building a proper greenhouse too," he added, "for vegetables in winter. The growing season's short here." "That sounds practical," Josephine said, finding it easy to engage with his plans. In Boston, some of the wealthier families had conservatories attached to their homes. They grew fruits and flowers even in the depths of winter. "Is that something you'd enjoy?" Samuel asked, watching her with interest. Working with plants, the question caught Josephine off guard. No one had asked about her interests in a very long time. Yes, actually. The family I worked for in Boston had a small kitchen garden. The children were meant to learn about nature by tending it, but in truth, I was the one who enjoyed it most." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "The soil here is different from what you're used to, but things will grow with enough water and care. Perhaps next spring we could plan that greenhouse together." Next spring. The casual mention of a shared future should have frightened her, but instead, Josephine found it oddly comforting. Samuel spoke not of what he would build, but of what they might create together. It suggested a future where her opinions mattered, where her contributions would be valued. After lunch, Samuel took her to see the rest of the ranch, the barn with its smell of hay and leather, the corrals where several horses eyed them curiously, the bunkhouse where the Wilson brothers lived, simple but comfortable. They walked along the creek that provided water for the ranch, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows that offered welcome shade. "The water runs year-round," Samuel explained. "That's rare in these parts, and it's what makes this land so valuable. Even in the driest summers, we've always had water." As they walked back toward the house, Josephine found herself studying Samuel when he wasn't looking. In this setting, he seemed even more at ease, more himself, a man who knew his purpose and his place in the world. There was confidence in the set of his shoulders, pride in the way he spoke of what he had built, but no arrogance. Just the quiet satisfaction of a man who had created something of value through his own hard work. It was attractive, she realized with a small shock. Not in the superficial way that Charles Blackwood had been attractive, with his fine clothes and practiced charm. Samuel's appeal ran deeper, rooted in substance rather than style. They reached the house as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Maria had left coffee and apple pie on the porch table for them, a thoughtful touch that Josephine appreciated. "She seems to approve of you," Samuel commented as they settled into the porch chairs. "Maria doesn't make her special apple pie for just anyone." "She seems like a wonderful person," Josephine said, accepting the slice of pie he offered. "Has she worked for you long?" "Almost from the beginning. She and her husband Jose came north from Mexico 20 years ago. Jose worked as my foreman until he died 3 years back. Horse through him, broke his neck." Samuel's expression saddened. "Maria wanted to keep working, said the ranch was her home now. She lives in town with her sister's family but comes up 3 days a week to cook and help with the house." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the play of light and shadow across the distant mountains as the sun lowered in the sky. Finally, Samuel set his empty plate aside and turned to face Josephine. "So," he said quietly, "what do you think of the lazy Q?" Josephine considered the question carefully, wanting to give an honest answer. "I think it's remarkable what you've built here. It feels like a real home, not just a house or a business, but a place where a life has been created." He nodded, seemingly pleased with her assessment. "And could you see yourself here, being part of this?" The directness of the question made her heart beat faster, but Josephine appreciated his straightforwardness. There were no games with Samuel Quincy, no hidden agendas, just honest questions requiring honest answers. "I think I could," she said slowly. "It would be very different from the life I've known, but perhaps that's for the best." "Different doesn't always mean worse," he observed. "No," she agreed. "Sometimes it means better." Samuel's blue eyes held hers, searching, assessing. "You've had time to consider my offer, and now you've seen the ranch. I meant what I said about not rushing you, but I'd like to know where your thoughts stand." Josephine took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment of decision. She had come west seeking safety, a fresh start, a chance to build a life free from fear and pain. What Samuel offered was not romance or passion, but something perhaps more valuable: respect, partnership, the opportunity to belong somewhere to someone on terms that preserved her dignity. "I would like to accept your proposal," she said finally, "if you're still willing, knowing what you now know about me." Relief washed over his features, followed by something that might have been happiness. "I am," he said simply, "more than willing." They sat together as the sun sank lower, discussing practical matters: when they would marry in 10 days, giving Josephine's bruises more time to heal, where they would live, here at the ranch, of course. What her role would be: partner, he emphasized again, not servant. As darkness began to fall, Samuel reluctantly suggested they should start back to town. "I promised to have you back before dark," he explained, "and while I'd happily offer you a room here tonight, I suspect Mrs. Bedford would have strong opinions about such an arrangement before we're properly married." The comment surprised a laugh from Josephine, the sound bright and unfamiliar to her own ears. When had she last laughed freely? "Yes, I believe she would," she agreed, rising from her chair. "And I've discovered I quite value Mrs. Bedford's good opinion." The ride back to Lovelock was quieter than the journey out, both of them absorbed in their thoughts about the decision they had made. As they neared town, Samuel broke the silence. "There's something else I should tell you," he said, his voice serious. "Something I haven't mentioned before." Josephine tensed slightly, wondering what revelation might be coming. Yes, I have family back east, a sister in Philadelphia, older than me by 5 years. Eleanor. We write regularly, but I haven't seen her in 8 years. He glanced at Josephine. I've told her about you, about our arrangement. She wants to come for a visit after the wedding to meet you. Oh, Josephine wasn't sure how to respond. The idea of being scrutinized by Samuel's sister, who presumably had known and loved his first wife, was intimidating. Does she disapprove? Samuel shook his head. No, nothing like that. Eleanor's practical like me. She understands why I made this choice, but she's protective. She wants to make sure you're comfortable, happy. The concern touched Josephine unexpectedly. That's very kind of her. She can be overwhelming, Samuel warned. Talks more than I do, has opinions about everything, but she means well, and she's my only family. He hesitated. Do you have anyone? Anyone who might want to know about your marriage? Josephine shook her head, a familiar sadness washing over her. No. My parents died when I was 16. I have a cousin in Maine, but we were never close. After my parents died, she made it clear she had no room in her life for an orphaned relation. Samuel's expression darkened. I'm sorry, families should stand by each other. Yes, Josephine agreed softly. They should. When they reached Mrs. Bedford's boarding house, Samuel helped Josephine down from the buggy, his hands lingering slightly at her waist. In the dusky light, his features were softer, his blue eyes warm as they met hers. I'll see you tomorrow, he asked, something almost hesitant in his tone. I'd like that, Josephine said, surprised by how much she meant it. Good. He smiled, that transformative expression that lightened his whole face. Perhaps we could have lunch at the hotel restaurant, start making plans for the wedding. That sounds perfect. He nodded once, then touched his hat in farewell. As Josephine watched him drive away, she realized with a start that for the first time since she had fled Boston, she was looking forward to tomorrow rather than dreading it. The next 10 days passed in a blur of activity as Josephine prepared for her wedding. Mrs. Bedford took her under her wing, introducing her to the town's dressmaker, who worked miracles with the limited time and materials available to create a wedding dress that was simple but elegant cream-colored cotton with lace trim, salvaged from one of her Boston dresses. The bruises on her face faded further, and while they weren't completely gone, they were much less noticeable. Samuel came to town every day, sometimes just for an hour or two, sometimes staying to share a meal or take her for a walk. They talked easily about practical matters, the running of the ranch, his plans for expansion, the responsibilities she would assume as his wife. But gradually, their conversations turned to more personal topics. He told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about his decision to come west after his father died, about his dreams for the future. In return, Josephine shared carefully selected stories from her own past, her happy childhood in Massachusetts before her parents' deaths, her education at a girls' seminary, her love of books and gardening. She didn't speak much about the darker years, her cousin's rejection, the series of positions as governess or companion that had eventually led her to Charles Blackwood's household. But Samuel seemed to understand the gaps in her narrative, never pressing for details she wasn't ready to share. What surprised Josephine most during these days was how comfortable she felt in Samuel's company. He never crowded her, never made her feel pressured or threatened. His manner was always respectful, his attention focused but not overwhelming. And gradually, she found herself looking forward to his visits not just as a break from solitude, but because she genuinely enjoyed his company. On the morning of their wedding day, a Saturday in early June, Josephine woke early in her room at Mrs. Bedford's boarding house. The day promised to be fine, with clear blue skies visible from her window. As she dressed with Mrs. Bedford's help, Josephine examined her reflection in the mirror. The bruises had faded to the faintest yellow shadows, barely visible unless one knew to look for them. But more striking was the change in her eyes. They were clearer, steadier, no longer carrying the hunted look they had held since her last night in Boston. "You make a lovely bride," Mrs. Bedford said, adjusting the simple veil she had helped Josephine fashion. "And you're marrying a good man." "That's no small thing." "No," Josephine agreed softly. "It's not." The wedding was held at Lovelock's small church, a simple white clapboard building with plain glass windows. Josephine had expected only a handful of witnesses, perhaps Mrs. Bedford, Maria, and the Wilson brothers, but was surprised to find the church nearly full when she arrived. It seemed the entire town had turned out to see Samuel Quincy marry his mail-order bride. Samuel waited for her at the front of the church, looking impossibly handsome in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes finding hers the moment she appeared in the doorway. As Josephine walked slowly down the aisle alone, there was no one to give her away. She felt not fear or doubt, but a strange sense of rightness, as if after a lifetime of wrong turns, she had finally found the correct path. The ceremony was brief, the elderly minister speaking the traditional words with genuine warmth. When it came time to exchange vows, Samuel's deep voice carried clearly through the church, steady and sure. Josephine's own voice trembled slightly, but grew stronger as she spoke the promises that would bind them together. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said finally. "You may kiss your bride." Samuel leaned forward slowly, giving Josephine ample time to pull away if she wished. But she didn't. His lips touched hers gently, a whisper of contact that was respectful rather than passionate, yet still sent a surprising warmth through her body. It was her first kiss as a married woman, and though it lasted only a moment, it sealed their contract more definitively than the words they had just spoken. Afterward, there was a small reception at the town hotel, another surprise Samuel had arranged. The townspeople came forward to congratulate them, some openly curious about the Eastern bride with the fading bruises, others more tactfully focused on wishing them happiness. Maria had prepared a wedding cake, decorated with fresh flowers, and someone produced bottles of champagne for toasts. Through it all, Samuel stayed close to Josephine's side, his solid presence reassuring as she navigated this unfamiliar social terrain. When he sensed she was becoming overwhelmed, he skillfully steered her to a quieter corner, bringing her a glass of cool water and a plate of food. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I know this is a lot to take in." "I'm fine," she assured him, "just surprised. I didn't expect so many people." "Small towns," he said with a wry smile. "Everyone knows everyone's business, but they mean well, and they're curious about you." "What have you told them?" "About me, I mean. Only that you came from Boston, that we corresponded for several months, and that I was fortunate enough to win your hand." His eyes held hers steadily. "The rest is your story to tell or keep private as you choose." Gratitude washed through her at his discretion, his respect for her privacy. "Thank you." As the afternoon wore on, Josephine found herself more at ease among these strangers who were now her neighbors. They were a diverse group: ranchers, merchants, miners, a few professionals like the town doctor and lawyer. Their wives were equally varied, some refined, others practical, but all seemingly genuine in their welcome. Mrs. Bedford had told her that frontier towns like Lovelock didn't have the luxury of excessive social distinctions. People depended on each other too much for survival to indulge in the rigid class hierarchies of Eastern society. It was another aspect of Western life that appealed to Josephine, the opportunity to be judged by her actions rather than her background or circumstances. Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the mountains, Samuel approached her. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly. "Home." The word carried such weight. Josephine nodded, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation fluttering in her stomach. They said their goodbyes to the assembled guests, accepting final congratulations and well wishes, then stepped out into the golden afternoon light where Samuel's buggy waited, decorated with ribbons and flowers by some well-meaning townsfolk. The ride to the ranch was mostly silent, both of them contemplative after the events of the day. As they crested the final rise and the lazy queue came into view, Samuel pulled the buggy to a halt, just as he had on her first visit. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quincy," he said quietly. Josephine looked out over her ranch now, her home, and felt a surge of emotion she couldn't quite name. It wasn't exactly happiness, not yet, but it was close. Hope, perhaps, the possibility of happiness to come. "Thank you," she said simply. When they reached the house, Samuel surprised her by coming around to her side of the buggy and lifting her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a small smile as he carried her across the threshold into their home. Inside, Josephine discovered that Maria had been busy in their absence. The house was spotless, with fresh flowers on the tables and a cold supper laid out in the dining room. A fire was lit in the main room's fireplace despite the warm evening, creating a welcoming atmosphere. "She thinks of everything," Josephine commented, genuinely touched by the housekeeper's thoughtfulness. "She likes you," Samuel said. "That's not a small thing. Maria's approval is hard-earned." They ate the simple meal Maria had prepared, talking easily about the wedding, the guests, the unexpected warmth of the town's reception. When they finished, Samuel poured them each a small glass of brandy and they moved to the main room, sitting in comfortable chairs before the fire. "I have something for you," Samuel said after a moment, reaching into his pocket. "A wedding gift." He handed her a small box, and Josephine opened it with curious fingers to find a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "It's beautiful," she said truthfully, touched by the gesture. "It was my mother's," Samuel explained. I thought you might like to have it, as a symbol of becoming part of this family." Josephine slipped the ring onto her right hand. Her left already wore the plain gold band he had placed there during the ceremony. "I'll treasure it," she promised, and meant it. As the evening deepened into night, the moment Josephine had both anticipated and dreaded drew closer, the time when they would retire to the bedroom upstairs, to the marriage bed. Samuel seemed to sense her nervousness, making no move to hurry the moment, allowing her to finish her brandy at her own pace. Finally, when the grandfather clock in the corner struck 10, Josephine set her empty glass aside. "I think I should prepare for bed," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Samuel nodded, his expression gentle. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll bank the fire and join you shortly." Josephine climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, carrying a small lamp to light her way. The room looked different now that it was hers, their room, with her few possessions unpacked and arranged neatly on the dresser, her nightgown and robe laid out on the bed by Maria's thoughtful hands. She changed quickly into the nightgown, the finest she owned, though still modest by any standard, and brushed out her hair until it fell in waves down her back. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped tightly in her lap, and waited. Samuel knocked softly before entering, a courtesy she hadn't expected but appreciated deeply. He carried another lamp, setting it on the dresser beside hers, casting the room in warm, golden light. He had removed his jacket and tie but was otherwise still fully dressed. "Josephine," he said quietly, standing a respectful distance from the bed. "I want to be clear about something. I meant what I said before about not forcing myself on you. Marriage gives me certain legal rights, but I don't consider those to be moral rights." She looked up at him, this man who was now her husband, and saw nothing but sincerity in his blue eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'd like our marriage to be real in every sense, but only when you're ready. Not before." He ran a hand through his hair, seeming almost nervous for the first time since she'd met him. "You've been through a terrible ordeal. The last thing you need is to feel pressured in your own home, in your own bed." Relief and something like gratitude washed through Josephine. "But where will you sleep?" she asked practically. "There are 2 other perfectly good bedrooms in this house," he said with a small smile. "I can use one of them until you feel comfortable with other arrangements." The consideration of this offer, so unexpected, so contrary to what society would expect of a husband on his wedding night, moved Josephine deeply. "You're a good man, Samuel Quincy," she said softly. He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed by the praise. "I just believe that some things are worth waiting for." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Good night, Josephine." "Good night, Samuel," she replied, watching as he left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Alone in the big bed that night, Josephine reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this moment. 3 months ago, she had been living in fear in Charles Blackwood's Boston mansion. Now she was married to a man she barely knew, living on a ranch in Nevada territory, about to begin a life she could scarcely have imagined. Yet despite all the uncertainty, despite all the changes, Josephine felt something she hadn't felt in years: safe. Samuel Quincy had looked at her bruised face when she stepped off that stagecoach and promised that no one would ever hurt her again. So far, he had given her every reason to believe he meant to keep that promise. With that comforting thought, Josephine Quincy closed her eyes and slept soundly through her first night in her new home. The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment for both Josephine and Samuel as they learned to navigate their new relationship. True to his word, Samuel continued to sleep in the guest bedroom, never pressuring Josephine for more intimacy than she was ready to give. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm: breakfast together before Samuel went out to work on the ranch, lunch when he returned to the house at midday, evenings spent in quiet conversation or reading by the fire. Josephine gradually took on more responsibilities around the house, working alongside Maria rather than simply giving orders. She learned to cook Western-style meals, to preserve the vegetables from the garden for winter use, to manage the household accounts. Samuel had been right: he didn't want a servant, but a partner, and Josephine found satisfaction in contributing to their shared life. As June turned to July, and the Nevada summer reached its peak, Josephine discovered unexpected pleasures in her new life. She loved the early mornings when the air was still cool and the light painted the mountains in shades of gold and pink. She enjoyed working in the garden, coaxing reluctant vegetables from the alkaline soil. She found comfort in the routine of ranch life: the predictable rhythms of dawn and dusk, of weekdays and Sundays, of work and rest. And most surprising of all, she found herself growing increasingly drawn to her husband. Samuel Quincy was not a man of many words, but his actions spoke volumes about his character. He was unfailingly kind, not just to Josephine but to everyone around him: the Wilson brothers, Maria, even the animals in his care. He worked harder than anyone on the ranch, never asking others to do tasks he wasn't willing to do himself. And he treated Josephine with a respect that gradually healed something broken inside her, something that had been damaged long before Charles Blackwood's final attack. It was a hot evening in late July when things changed between them. They had taken to sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the mountains while they talked about their day. On this particular evening, Samuel had returned from a long day of repairing fences, tired but satisfied with the work accomplished. Jim spotted mountain lion tracks near the north pasture, he mentioned as they sipped cool tea. I'll ride out tomorrow to check on the herd, make sure we haven't lost any calves. Is it dangerous? Josephine asked, surprised by the flutter of concern she felt at the thought of Samuel facing a mountain lion. He shrugged. Can be. But they usually avoid humans unless they're desperate or cornered. He glanced at her, a small smile playing at his lips. Worried about me, Mrs. Quincy? The teasing note in his voice was new, and Josephine found herself responding to it. Perhaps a little, Mr. Quincy. I've grown rather accustomed to having you around. His smile widened. Have you now? Yes. She hesitated, then added softly, very much so. Something shifted in Samuel's eyes, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand in his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. It was a simple touch, but it sent a current of awareness through Josephine's body. Josephine, he said, his voice deeper than usual. May I kiss you? The question, so respectfully asked, so different from Charles's demands, made Josephine's heart beat faster. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Samuel rose from his chair and knelt before hers, bringing his face level with hers. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, but when Josephine leaned into it, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek, it deepened into something more still tender, but with an undercurrent of longing that surprised her with its intensity. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that properly since our wedding day, he admitted. Why didn't you? Josephine asked, curious rather than accusing. Because I wanted you to be sure, to choose it freely. His blue eyes searched hers. Are you sure, Josephine? In answer, she leaned forward and kissed him again, letting her actions speak the words she wasn't quite ready to say aloud. When they separated this time, Samuel stood and offered her his hand. Come to bed, wife, he said softly. Josephine placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her into the house, up the stairs, to the bedroom that had been hers alone these past weeks. At the door, he paused, uncertainty flickering across his features. We don't have to. I want to, Josephine interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. I'm ready, Samuel. I trust you. His expression softened at her words. That means more to me than I can say. What followed was nothing like Josephine's fearful imagination had conjured. Samuel was gentle, patient, guiding her through unfamiliar territory with tender care. He treated her body as something precious, something to be cherished rather than possessed. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, Josephine discovered a kind of joy she had never known existed, not just physical pleasure, but the profound intimacy of being truly known and accepted by another person. Afterward, lying in the circle of Samuel's arms, Josephine felt tears slip from her eyes. Samuel noticed immediately, his expression concerned as he brushed them away with his thumb. Did I hurt you? He asked, voice tight with worry. No, she assured him quickly. No, not at all, it's just... She struggled to find the words to express the complicated emotions swirling inside her. I never knew it could be like this, that I could feel safe and desired at the same time. Understanding dawned in Samuel's eyes, followed by a flash of anger that she knew wasn't directed at her. What happened to you in Boston, he began, then stopped, visibly controlling his emotions. That wasn't what intimacy should be. It was violence, pure and simple. I know that now, Josephine said softly. Because of you, because you've shown me what respect truly means. Samuel gathered her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You deserve nothing less, Josephine, nothing less than complete respect and care. As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Josephine realized something that both surprised and comforted her. The mail-order bride arrangement that had begun as a desperate escape had become something she had never dared to hope for: a true marriage, with the potential for genuine love. Samuel Quincy had promised her safety when she stepped off that stagecoach covered in bruises. What she hadn't expected was that he would also give her the chance to heal, to grow, to become more fully herself than she had ever been before. The late summer and early fall were the happiest months of Josephine's life. Her relationship with Samuel deepened daily, moving beyond mutual respect into genuine affection and desire. They learned each other's rhythms, preferences, the small details that made up a shared life. Samuel discovered that Josephine loved wildflowers and began bringing her small bouquets when he returned from riding the range. Josephine learned that Samuel had a sweet tooth and took to baking apple pies that made him close his eyes in appreciation at the first bite. Their physical relationship blossomed as well, Josephine's initial hesitation giving way to eager participation, as she discovered the joys of physical intimacy untainted by fear or coercion. Samuel was an attentive, generous lover, always attuned to her responses, never taking more than she was willing to give. In September, Samuel's sister Elena arrived from Philadelphia for a 2-week visit. Josephine had been nervous about meeting her, worried that Samuel's only family would find her wanting in comparison to his first wife. But Elena Quincy Walsh proved to be warm and forthright, with the same direct blue eyes as her brother, but a more animated manner. "So you're the brave woman who's taken on my brother and this God-forsaken wilderness," she declared upon meeting Josephine, pulling her into an unexpected hug. "Good for you. He needs someone with spirit." Over the course of her visit, Elena became not just Samuel's sister but Josephine's friend. The two women talked for hours while Samuel attended to ranch business, about books, about the East versus the West, about the challenges and rewards of marriage. Elena shared stories of Samuel's childhood, filling in pieces of his past that helped Josephine understand her husband better. And gradually, Josephine found herself confiding in Elena about her own past, the difficulties after her parents' deaths, the positions that had grown increasingly restrictive, and finally, in halting words, about Charles Blackwood. "If I ever meet that man," Elena said fiercely when Josephine finished her story, "I'll horsewhip him myself." The fierce protectiveness in her voice, so similar to Samuel's, brought tears to Josephine's eyes. "It's over now," she said. "I'm safe here." Elena's expression softened. "Yes, you are. My brother may be a man of few words, but when he makes a promise, he keeps it." She hesitated, then added, "He loves you, you know. I can see it in the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." Josephine's heart quickened at these words. I love him too," she admitted, the first time she had spoken the words aloud. "I didn't expect to, not so soon, but I do." "Have you told him?" "Not yet, I wasn't sure." "Tell him," Elena advised firmly. "My brother has known loss, Josephine. He understands how precious love is, how easily it can slip away. Don't wait to tell him what's in your heart." The night before Elena was to leave, after Samuel's sister had retired to the guest room, Josephine and Samuel sat together on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed up at the star-filled Nevada sky. "I'll miss Elena," Josephine said softly. "She's been wonderful." She likes you, Samuel replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. More than she liked Sarah, I think, though she'd never admit it. This surprised Josephine. Really? Why? Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering. Sarah was delicate, beautiful, kind, but not built for this life. She tried for my sake, but it was hard on her. The isolation, the physical demands, the harsh conditions. Alina worried about her. He tightened his arm around Josephine. You're different, stronger in some ways, more adaptable. Alina sees that. I didn't feel strong when I arrived, Josephine admitted. I felt broken. Bent, maybe, but never broken, Samuel corrected gently. There's steel in you, Josephine Harper Quincy. It's what helped you survive Boston, what brought you all this way alone, what's helping you build a new life here. His faith in her touched something deep inside Josephine. Taking a deep breath, she turned to face him fully. Samuel, I need to tell you something. His expression grew serious, attentive. What is it? I love you. The words were simple but heartfelt, carrying the weight of all she had come to feel for this man who had saved her in more ways than he knew. I didn't expect to, not when I first agreed to marry you. I hoped for safety, for respect, but not this fullness of feeling. Samuel's face transformed, joy lighting his features in a way that made him look younger, almost boyish. Josephine, he breathed, cupping her face in his hands as if she were something infinitely precious. I have loved you since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, bruised but unbowed. I loved your courage then, and I love the woman I've come to know these past months even more. He kissed her then, pouring all his feelings into the contact, and Josephine responded in kind, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing herself against the solid warmth of his chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. I didn't think I could love again after Sarah, he confessed quietly. I thought that part of me had died with her, but you brought it back to life. You made me want to try again. I'm glad you did, Josephine whispered. So very glad. They made love that night with a new depth of feeling, the words they had finally spoken aloud adding another layer to their physical connection. Afterward, as Josephine lay in the circle of Samuel's arms, she felt a contentment she had never known before, a sense of belonging, of rightness, of having found her place in the world. When Alina departed the next day, heading back east on the stagecoach, she hugged Josephine fiercely. Take care of him, she whispered, and let him take care of you. That's what family does. Family. The word echoed in Josephine's mind long after the stagecoach had disappeared from view. She had a family now, Samuel, and by extension, Alina. People who cared about her welfare, who would stand by her no matter what. It was a gift beyond price. As autumn painted the Nevada landscape in golds and reds, Josephine discovered something that both terrified and elated her. She was with child. The first signs were subtle: a persistent tiredness, a queasiness in the mornings, certain foods suddenly unappealing. But when her monthly courses failed to appear for the second time, she could no longer deny the evidence. She waited a week before telling Samuel, wanting to be sure, and also needing time to process her own complicated feelings. Childbirth had taken Sarah and her baby. Would Samuel be afraid for her? Would the shadow of his past loss darken what should be a joyful time? Finally, on a crisp October evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, Josephine gathered her courage. Samuel, she said softly, taking his hand in hers, I have news. He turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. What is it? I'm going to have a baby, our baby, in the spring. For a moment, Samuel was utterly still, his face frozen in an expression Josephine couldn't read. Then, to her shock, tears filled his blue eyes and spilled over, tracking down his weathered cheeks. Samuel, she asked, alarmed by this unprecedented display of emotion. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly but carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." "You're happy?" Josephine asked, needing to be sure. Samuel pulled back enough to look into her eyes, his own still damp with tears. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he said hoarsely. "But Josephine, I'm also afraid, after what happened to Sarah." "I know," she said, touching his face gently. "I've thought about that too, but Samuel, I'm not Sarah. And this is 1875, not 1870. We have Dr. Wilson in town now. We can take precautions." He nodded, clearly trying to master his emotions. "We'll do everything possible to keep you safe," he promised. "Whatever it takes." As the news of her pregnancy spread through the small community, Josephine was touched by the genuine warmth of the response. Maria immediately began adjusting Josephine's diet, insisting on more meat and milk for the baby's strength. The Wilson brothers took on extra tasks around the ranch to spare Samuel time to be with Josephine. And the women of Lovelock, led by Mrs. Bedford, began arriving with gifts, tiny knitted garments, advice both practical and superstitious, offers of help when the time came. Samuel became even more protective, insisting Josephine rest more, hiring a young girl from town to help with the heavier household tasks, constantly checking that she was comfortable and well. His concern was touching, if occasionally smothering, and Josephine gently reminded him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, often under far less favorable conditions than she enjoyed. "I know," he admitted one night as they lay together in bed, his hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly. "But I can't help worrying. You and this child, you're my whole world now." "And you're ours," Josephine replied, guiding his hand to where she had just felt the first butterfly flutter of movement. "Feel that? He's saying hello to his papa." Samuel's eyes widened in wonder. You think it's a boy," Josephine smiled. "Just a feeling. Would you mind if it was a girl?" "Mind?" Samuel shook his head firmly. "Boy or girl, this child will be loved. That's all that matters." As winter settled over the Nevada mountains, bringing snow and bitter cold, the Lazy Q Ranch became a cocoon of warmth and anticipation. Samuel completed work on the greenhouse he had mentioned during Josephine's first visit, creating a glass-enclosed space attached to the south side of the house where she could tend plants even during the coldest months. It was his Christmas gift to her, presented with shy pride on Christmas Eve. "It's perfect," Josephine breathed as she walked through the space, already planted with winter vegetables and the seedlings of flowers that would bloom in spring. "Thank you, Samuel." His gift to him was more modest, but no less meaningful, a hand-knitted sweater made from the finest wool she could obtain, worked on secretly during the hours he was out on the range. "To keep you warm when you're out in the cold," she explained as he ran appreciative fingers over the even stitches. "I'll treasure it," he promised, pulling it on immediately over his shirt. "Perfect fit." They celebrated Christmas quietly, just the two of them, with a special dinner prepared by Josephine under Maria's distant supervision, exchanging small gifts and enjoying the peaceful evening by the fire. As midnight approached, Samuel pulled Josephine gently to her feet. "Come outside for a moment," he suggested. "I want to show you something." Bundled in heavy coats against the cold, they stepped onto the porch. The night was crystal clear, the stars impossibly bright in the black velvet sky. But what took Josephine's breath away was the silence, a perfect, pristine quiet broken only by the soft crunch of their boots on fresh snow. "It's beautiful," she whispered, reluctant to disturb the peace with louder speech. "This is what I love about winter here," Samuel said softly, his arm around her waist. "The absolute stillness, like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting." They stood together in the silence, their breath making small clouds in the frigid air, and Josephine was struck by how far she had come from the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Lovelock just 7 months earlier. That woman could never have imagined this moment standing beneath a star-filled sky beside a man she loved deeply, carrying their child beneath her heart, filled with hope rather than fear. "Thank you," she said suddenly, turning to face Samuel. "For what?" he asked, puzzled. "For everything. For seeing something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. For keeping your promise that no one would hurt me again. For giving me a home, a family, a future." Samuel's expression softened as he pulled her closer, careful of her growing belly. "You saved yourself, Josephine. All I did was offer a hand when you needed one." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "But you're welcome all the same." As they returned to the warmth of their home, hand in hand, Josephine thought about the strange, twisting path that had brought her to this moment. The pain and fear in Boston, the desperate journey west, the arrival in Lovelock with her face covered in bruises, all of it had led here, to this life, this love, this future filled with promise rather than dread. It wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself as a young girl, but it was a life of her own choosing. A life built on respect and kindness rather than fear and control. A life with a man who had looked at her bruised face and whispered a promise he had never broken. "No one will ever hurt you again." Samuel had kept that promise, but he had given her so much more: the freedom to heal, to grow, to love. And for that, Josephine Harper Quincy would be forever grateful. Spring came early to the Nevada mountains that year, the snow melting from the valley floor by early March while it still capped the distant peaks. As the land awakened from its winter slumber, so too did the life within Josephine, her baby becoming increasingly active as her body expanded to accommodate its growth. By April, Josephine was in her final month of pregnancy, her movements slowed but her spirits high. Samuel had arranged for Dr. Wilson to stay at the ranch for the week around her expected delivery date, and Maria had moved in temporarily to help with household matters. The nursery was ready, the small room next to their bedroom transformed with a handmade cradle, Samuel's work. Soft blankets, gifts from the women of Lovelock, and a rocking chair positioned beneath the window where Josephine could sit with their child and look out over the land that would be their heritage. On a perfect spring morning in late April, with wildflowers carpeting the hillsides and new leaves budding on the cottonwoods along the creek, Josephine's labor began. Samuel had been checking fence lines but returned immediately when Jim Wilson rode out to fetch him. He found Josephine walking slowly around their bedroom, Maria and Dr. Wilson nearby, her face serene despite the discomfort she was clearly feeling. "Samuel," she said when she saw him, a smile brightening her features, "you're just in time." For the next several hours, Samuel remained at Josephine's side, holding her hand through contractions, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement as her labor progressed. Dr. Wilson, a young but competent physician who had delivered dozens of babies throughout the territory, monitored her condition carefully, his manner reassuring even as the hours stretched on. As evening approached, Josephine's labor intensified, the pain becoming more difficult to bear silently. Samuel's face was drawn with concern, his eyes never leaving hers as she struggled through each contraction. "You're doing beautifully," Dr. Wilson assured her during a brief respite. "The baby is positioned perfectly. It won't be much longer now." He was right. Just as the sun was setting, painting the mountains visible through their bedroom window in shades of gold and rose, Josephine gave one final push, and their child entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Samuel's eyes. "A boy, Doctor." Wilson announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Josephine's chest. A fine, healthy son. Samuel bent to kiss Josephine's damp forehead, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You did it," he whispered. "You're both safe." The relief in his voice told Josephine everything about the fear he had been carrying these past months, the shadow of Sarah's death in childbirth that had haunted him despite his attempts to hide it. She reached up to touch his cheek, her heart full of love for this man who had been her rock through all of this. "We're fine," she assured him. "All three of us." They named their son William Samuel Quincy after Samuel's father and himself. Little Will, as he was quickly nicknamed, had his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair, a combination that prompted Maria to declare him the most beautiful baby in all of Nevada territory. The first weeks of Will's life were a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and stolen moments of sleep, but Josephine had never been happier. Samuel proved to be an attentive father, perfectly willing to walk the floor with his fussing son in the middle of the night to let Josephine rest, or to change a diaper without complaint. The sight of her tall, strong husband cradling their tiny son against his chest, singing softly in his deep voice, never failed to fill Josephine with a love so intense it was almost painful. When Will was a month old, Alina arrived from Philadelphia for another visit, this time staying for the entire summer. She fell instantly in love with her nephew, pronouncing him a perfect blend of Quincy and Harper, and proved to be an invaluable help as Josephine adjusted to motherhood. The three adults settled into an easy rhythm, with Alina taking charge of many household tasks while Josephine focused on recovering her strength and caring for Will. As summer progressed, Josephine found herself reflecting often on the journey that had brought her to this moment of contentment. The bruises Charles Blackwood had inflicted were long healed, leaving no visible marks, but the emotional scars had taken longer to fade. Yet fade they had, under the steady warmth of Samuel's love and respect. The fearful, wounded woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Lovelock 14 months earlier was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, more fully herself than she had ever been before. On a warm August evening, while Alina entertained Will in the main room, Josephine and Samuel walked hand in hand along the creek that ran through their property. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land that had become her home, and Josephine felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. "Happy?" Samuel asked, reading her expression with the ease of long intimacy. "Completely," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now from what it was before I came west. How much has changed in such a relatively short time." Samuel's expression sobered slightly. "Do you ever regret it, coming here, marrying a stranger, taking on this life?" "Never," Josephine said firmly. "Not for a single moment." She stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "Samuel, when I boarded that stagecoach in Boston, I was running away from something terrible. I didn't dare hope for happiness, I just wanted safety. But what I found here was so much more than that. I found a home. I found purpose. I found love." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "You promised me that no one would ever hurt me again, and you've kept that promise. But you've given me far more than protection. You've given me the chance to become the person I was always meant to be." Samuel's blue eyes shone with emotion as he drew her into his arms. "I love you, Josephine Harper Quincy," he said softly, "more than I ever thought it possible to love anyone again." "And I love you," she whispered back. "My steadfast, honorable cowboy." As they stood together in the fading light, the air around them sweet with the scent of sage and summer flowers, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. not in the drawing rooms of Boston society, not in the confined role of governess or companion, but here on this wild, beautiful land, beside this good man, with their child waiting in the house they had made a home. The mail-order bride arrangement that had begun as a desperate escape had become the greatest blessing of her life. The bruises that had marked her body when she arrived were long gone, the wounds to her spirit healed by time and love, and the steady reassurance of Samuel's unwavering respect. She had arrived broken, but she had been made whole again. And for that, Josephine Harper Quincy would be forever grateful to the tall, quiet cowboy who had whispered a promise on that fateful day in Lovelock, a promise he had kept faithfully. "No one will ever hurt you again.